Changing Lanes, the official podcast of BMW. Welcome to this episode of Changing Lanes, the official podcast of BMW. My name is Jonathan, tech geek, fun fact fan, and speed freak with cars and the internet. And today on the podcast, we have two special guests with us, Nico Larco and Armin Greta. And our topic is autonomous driving. Now, Nico Larco is a professor at the University of Oregon, researching the topic from a scientific standpoint, and Armin Greta is an engineer at BMW, working in implementation of autonomous driving. So today we have the pleasure of getting an inside peek into Nico and Armin's perspective on what the car of the future has in store. But before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment, just you and me, to establish a basic understanding of autonomous driving. Now, it seems like everyone is talking about it, and there are few topics as heavily and emotionally discussed by scientists, engineers, and fans. So, you've probably seen comments on social media or, overheard a conversation at a party where the topic was autonomous driving. And you've probably seen or heard things like this. This will never happen, or this technology will never be safe, or people will never be willing to lean back and let the car drive itself. And yes, these comments and conversations can shape the way we understand such a complex topic like autonomous driving. But maybe, just maybe, it can shape our understanding of it without getting all the facts. And I don't know about you, but I like to get all the facts before I make a decision on how I feel about it. And that's what today's podcast is all about, getting the facts on autonomous driving from experts. At least for me, it's my goal to get a better understanding of what autonomous driving really is and how it can shape our future of mobility in the most positive, safe, and efficient ways. All right, so this is how much I understand about autonomous driving. And actually, we've even done an entire episode on it. So feel free to check out episode number 2 to dive deeper. Now, with that out of the way, it's time to bring on our two special guests, Nico Larco and Armin Greta. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having us.
All right, so to make things interesting, let's play a game. So Nico, in 30 seconds or less, how would you describe what you do to a 100-year-old grandmother?
Okay, 100-year-old grandmother, let's see. So there's all these new innovations that are happening in the world, particularly autonomous vehicles. There is things like Uber and Lyft that have rideshare. There's microtransit. And then there's things like e-commerce that are happening. What we're interested in is looking at how these emerging technologies and innovations are going to be impacting things outside of transportation. So what are the impacts going to be on things like land use and land values, on street design, neighborhood design, on equity concerns, on the environment? We're really looking at the cascading impacts of these innovations in cities.
Fantastic. And Armin, same question. In 30 seconds or less, how would you describe what you do to a 100-year-old grandmother?
Well, in fact, my grandmother is 94 now, so I'm not sure. She doesn't have a driver license. But when you are driving in traffic jams and so on, it's quite annoying. So what we are developing at the moment is driving autonomously. You don't need to drive anymore, but you are driven by your car. And this is the key of the technology and will change the world on the streets rapidly and thoroughly.
Fantastic. So now we have a better understanding of what you two do, and I think so do a few 100-year-old grandmothers. So thanks for breaking it down quickly into understandable job titles, but I really want to go deeper. All right, let's start with you, Nico. Let's take it back to the early years. So how did you get involved in researching autonomous driving, which brought you to where you are today?
So great, yeah. So I've actually been researching this topic for a fairly short time, it seems, but in general terms, about 4 years. But in the world that we're working in, it's ancient. I'm a professor and researcher at the University of Oregon in the United States, and I'm the director of something called the Urbanism Next Center, where we look at all these impacts of emerging technologies on cities. And what was happening is we were starting to look at broad implications, broad forces that were going to be changing the way that cities worked a few years back. And one of the things that we came across was this idea of autonomous driving, new mobility, all these new ways of moving around, and e-commerce. And we started thinking, oh my goodness, these things seem to they're having, and they will continue to have really large impacts. And so we started to do some research on this, thinking that we would find a lot of work that existed in this topic, and we'd figure out how it is that we could add to it. And to our great surprise, there was very little information out there, very little research on the topic. There's a whole lot of information and research on the technologies themselves, on transportation, but there was very little research on the impacts on land use, on equity and health, on design, urban design. And so being an academic, seeing this opportunity, at first we were very excited about this, saying, oh my goodness, we're in an area that's new. No one's really looked at these topics. And then about a month into it, when we really started doing more thinking about it and had done a good amount of research, we realized that the implications and impacts could be very large and potentially very negative if we didn't do this right, if we didn't prepare cities correctly for it and adopt these new technologies in a good way. And so what became first a kind of research interest and this opportunity to learn more about this topic and figure out how to push it further became a moment of, oh my goodness, we really need to figure this out. This could be detrimental. It could be great, and it could be detrimental. We really need to be forward thinking about this.
Amazing. So what I love about today's conversation is that we have you, Nico, from Oregon, and we have Amin, who's in Germany. Now, Amin, tell us a little bit about the work that you do and how you help with driving autonomous driving forward.
Yes, thank you. We are really doing a kind of completely, not new and revolution, but we do an evolutionary approach where we start from having some assistance systems in the cars back in the 2000s, and then coming with lane keeping assistance and so on. And during the last 5 years, we are now in the development of having really autonomous driving for highways as a first step, and then we will further develop autonomous driving in city areas and maybe somewhere in the future also in country roads. So what we are learning when we do these developments is that people in the first step are always very anxious and they are reluctant to try it out. But when they are then confronted with the technology and see how fabulous the cars work, then they completely lose their anxiousness and they completely get into being completely convinced about it.
Fantastic. Okay, Nico, so in your opinion, what's the most important topic around autonomous driving that's currently on the minds of the people that you're talking to?
I'm going to say two things. One of them, first and foremost, is a safety question: is are AVs real? Will they be able to operate and provide the safety that is needed? One, better safety than what we have right now with people driving, but also significantly better safety because there's a lot of concern of having a machine make errors as opposed to having individual people make errors. The second big piece, I think, is the people that I work with more on the research side and from cities is this question requires a little bit of background. So if we think about autonomous vehicles, the idea is that we'll call the vehicle electronically, it shows up at our door, we get in, it takes us somewhere, and we get out. That model already exists right now with things in the United States, around the country, but a lot of it happening in the United States, things like Uber. And so we can see that we often say we already have autonomous vehicles in our cities. It's just that they have drivers. What we mean by that is that the model is the same, right? An Uber, I call, it shows up, I get in, it takes me somewhere, I get out. AVs will be the same. So if we think about autonomous vehicles as a almost Uber on steroids, right? A huge increase in the availability and of this. We could start to look at the impacts that we're having from things like Uber, and Lyft is another company here in the United States, and think about what the overall impact's going to be. And right now, the impacts on Uber on things that a lot of cities care about has not been fantastic. So There's been increases in vehicle miles traveled, how much travel happens, for each trip, substantial increases, greater than 60%, sometimes greater than 100%, because of vehicles driving around empty. There's been questions about the impacts that it'll have on equity. Where will these vehicles be available? Will people be able to use them who aren't tech savvy or don't have, data plans, for instance? Will this cause more congestion overall, which right now it's causing TNCs, the Uber type services are causing significant congestion in cities. In San Francisco, they are taking up 13% of the traffic in the city. So a lot of questions of what will the impacts overall be, and will they let us get to our climate change, sustainability, equity goals?
So this is a great question to bring on over to Amin. So what is going on behind the scenes? What are the experts currently working on? Any of these things that Nico was speaking about?
Absolutely. This is one of the key questions of the future at all, because when we don't succeed in having traffic in cities better organized and more efficient, then we will lose any of our credits in the society. So as a producer of cars, it's key for us that we can prove with this technology that we are really improving the society from an overall picture. So what we are doing just at the moment is having the first steps into this direction. And by the way, this was kind of interesting to me to hear what this podcast is named, because it's Changing Lanes, and this is just one of the topics we are working on, and it's really not easy to make an automatic lane change on highways. This is even the whole bunch of technology is a very wide field, and I think starting with highway automation and then coming to urban automation is a very good way forward to bring up things, and then people are able to get used to it, and people really get convinced that this works, and it's will be a big advantage to the society at last.
Wow, fantastic. And I love hearing these behind the scenes stories of, changing lanes is a topic that you guys are working on that, of course, with safety involved, like Nico was saying, how important it is to be safe, but also how important it is to create the technology that we are as safe as possible on the streets, whether we're changing lanes or doing, like you were saying, Nico, where autonomous driving is already happening with Lyft and Uber. Fantastic. All right, so now that we have a better understanding of where you both are coming from and what you're currently working on, I'd like to focus more on the future of autonomous driving. And because I, like many of our listeners, I'm curious about where this is all headed, I'd like you to finish a few sentences for me, but there's a trick to it. The trick is you can only finish this one sentence and one sentence only. So when that one sentence is over, then you're done. All right. So no long, it could be a long-winded sentence with many commas and dashes, but only one sentence. All right.
All right.
Okay. So here's the first sentence. Please finish this one sentence for me. The biggest change through autonomous driving for society will be, Nico, do you want to take this?
There's like 3 or 4 points, but I'll try to weave it into one sentence.
Okay.
The biggest change through autonomous driving for society will be, on the one hand, increased mobility, people's ability to get around easier. Another one related to that will be a change in how much we consume transportation. Another one will be that there will be a shift in the amount of vehicle ownership there is and how much we think of our own vehicles as ways we move around, as opposed to purchasing rides, not vehicles. And the last one is a tremendous shift in how we develop in cities, where we want to live, and the overall form of cities.
Wow.
That was a little bit cheating, but
there were lots of commas in there, but that was one sentence. All right. So, Nico, that was your take on it. Amin, finish the sentence. The biggest change through autonomous driving for society will be
that each individual in this society will be able to be transported wherever he wants or she wants in the moment she wants, because mobility will be available throughout the whole day and night and in the countryside.
Convenience, yeah. Awesome. All right, not bad. I was thinking this was going to be trickier for you guys, but you guys get a handle on this. All right.
You set good rules.
So here's the next one sentence and one sentence only. So the number one hurdle for the realization of autonomous driving is, Amin, do you want to take it?
At the moment, very technically speaking, the laser scanner, which is the key technology to really make a very good performance and safety system when you get to the perception of the environment. But the even bigger hurdle would then be the artificial intelligence behind this laser scanner.
Excellent. Nico, the number one hurdle for the realization of autonomous driving is?
Related to what just was said, I think proving that it is substantially safer than human drivers, and related to that, proving that the risk of hacking is surmountable, that it's something that can be addressed.
You know, me personally as a driver, you know, this is just Jonathan speaking. Like hearing this come from both of you guys, you know, the laser scanner and the security and making sure that it's, you know, hackers can't get in. That's already, now I don't even understand the technology, but that's already giving me a much more positive viewpoint on the future of autonomous driving. So I just need to put that out there. I hope the listeners are feeling the same way as me. All right, so the next sentence that I'd like you guys to finish in one sentence and one sentence only is the biggest benefits of autonomous driving for future customers are. Nico, do you want to go for this?
Could be fantastic. Increased mobility and accessibility for a ton of people. I mean, that would be absolutely great. And less injuries and fatalities. Also fantastic.
Those are two huge benefits. I mean, the biggest benefits of autonomous driving for future customers are?
When we look in our studies of our customers, then we see that most of our customers really drive every day to work or wherever. So the commuting use cases is absolutely in the focus, and the biggest benefits in the commuting area is that people get their time back. They get quality time back from the car.
Great, thanks. So let's move on to this sentence. Finish this sentence. The impact on city life with the implementation of autonomous driving is... Nico, want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. And can I also make just one comment? When you go over the 5 levels of automation, I find this like a problem everywhere that I go when I'm talking to people around these topics, that everyone says, well, level 5 is not going to happen for ages. And my big argument is that level 5 doesn't matter as much. Level 4 is the real game changer. Because level 4 is where it might not be, you know, on rural roads and, you know, some parts of the most rural parts of Germany. If it's in the cities and the major roadways, you know, the freeways going between cities, that's level 4 automation, and that will have tremendous impacts already. So just to get people oriented that level 4 is the real game changer, not level 5.
I mean, the impact on city life with the implementation of autonomous driving is?
I can only fully agree to Nico, but there's one very concrete thing, which is also a quite surprising fact, that nearly 1/3 of the traffic in the inner cities is parking surge traffic. So if we simply can only delete parking surge traffic, then we would have such a big positive impact. And then if we then even could delete 1/3 of the parking spots, again, then we would have new cafes and new restaurants and everything. The city will be so much more lively. This is a big, big change, I think.
Wow. So that is a big impact on city life. All right. So next question. Finish the sentence. The biggest fear about autonomous driving with the general public that you guys as experts would like to dissipate is... Nico, do you want to take it?
I would reiterate what Armin just said, which is that level 4 is really the game changer in all of this. That having major cities and the freeways that connect them being places where AVs work is tremendously game changing, and that will happen well before the level 5. And as Armin said, maybe level 5 is completely elusive for as far as we can see forward. But level 4 is where we really need to be thinking, and even deployment in smaller areas within cities could already be large game changers, or deployment only on roadways between cities could be a major game changer.
Excellent. And Amin, the biggest fear about autonomous driving with the general public that we as experts would like to dissipate is?
Now it's my turn to reiterate. Nico really brought it to the point. And I only like to say it in a way that we are seeing people experiencing the today's driver assistance systems, which have only a few sensors on board and a quite low-tech approach, which has really strong limits. And we see these limits every day when we drive them. And it's a hard thing for people who are not fans of cars to really get involved into these driver assistance systems. They are really not easy to operate, and we are really seeing people, as soon as they are used to it, they really don't want to have it without it again. But when it comes to autonomous driving level 3, or even then later with level 4, we have such a much higher level of quality and safety and robustness of this whole system. With all these sensors around, we will see a so much more robust system that is no matter anymore about the quality of the system and the performance. But if you think that the system as it is today will be automated, then I understand also some concerns of the public. But we will see when it comes to the market, it has very robust and high quality. And the fear of people, again, when I started this interview, we saw that the experience of the people will change their habits completely.
Autonomous driving in 10 years will be,
definitely on motorways, maybe also in cities, but you won't expect too much from the technology. Some people get reluctant to say when will we really able to drive through cities in a regular way. So there is a long way forward, but the benefits will be there, definitely.
And Nico, finish the sentence. Autonomous driving in 10 years will be?
Deployed in a few select cities with a whole lot of looking at what the actual impacts are and how people change their behavior.
Wow. Deployed in a few cities. Dare I even ask which ones they are, or is that totally top secret?
I can guess, but I don't know for sure. But looking at what's happening in the United States, there are cities that have better weather, that are grids, that and that cars are probably have a pretty good say of the road.
Cool. All right. I'm going to Wikipedia that and look for some statistics of those types of things that you said. All right, man, this is so fascinating. All right, so let's keep the energy up and keep it playful. I've got 3 specific questions that I'd like to have a miniature discussion about with the 3 of us. So the first question, and by the way, all these 3 questions are true or false. So here we go. Question number 1. Autonomous driving will change how and where we will work and spend time with our families in the future. True or false? Nico.
Who do you want to answer?
Nico, start. Why don't you start?
Absolutely true.
Okay. And Amin?
I think also absolutely true.
Okay. So let's discuss this a bit. You know, the question was autonomous driving will change how and where we will work and spend time with our families in the future. So give me an example of that.
So maybe I can start. So let me give you an example that we talk about all the time. If you think about how long a commute, people are willing to accept commute times. In the United States, it's somewhere around 26 minutes of commute time in each direction. And if you think about what will happen with autonomous vehicles, a couple things. First of all, in those 26 minutes, you will be able to go further because autonomous vehicles, especially on motorways, I think will be more efficient. I'm not convinced that they're going to be more efficient on within dense urban areas, but within motorways, they should be more efficient. So we can get further in that time. And the second thing is that instead of having 26 minutes that I need to be focused on the road and frustrated with the people who are driving around me, I can spend 26 minutes doing something that might be more pleasurable, as was mentioned before, better use of my time. I could be reading, I could be watching a movie, I could be playing with my kids, eating, doing all sorts of different things. And so maybe instead of 26 minutes, maybe I'm willing to do 30 or 35 minutes, which means that it can take me even further in during my commute. So we see an absolute possibility that there'll be tremendous pressure for the outward expansion of cities. If people want cheaper land, or they want to be out closer to nature, that possibility will exist for them. And so the whole metropolitan footprint will expand.
And Amin?
I fully agree, and I wouldn't need to say something more, but I would give some other hint to it. We have talked, or Nico, you talked already about using your time for other things. Maybe it's also a very good thing that people who are working on the road, let's say, they have the time in the car to really relax and maybe also do their work there, and are earlier back at home. So maybe I don't believe, to be honest, too much in the place where you live will change so strong, but the way how we work and where we work will change strongly, and maybe we also get rid of jobs who nobody wants to do in this case.
So it's no longer, I mean, it still is a thing of, what we do and that we are driving, but it's a mental shift of how we drive or how we are driven. This is fantastic. This is an amazing mental shift that I'm going through myself as well. Okay, so the second question, true or false? Autonomous driving is the greatest opportunity and danger for the automotive industry in recent decades. True or false? Let's start with let's start with opportunity, right? So autonomous driving is the greatest opportunity for the automotive industry in recent decades. I mean.
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced about this. There are many opportunities at the moment. We're talking about electromobility, alternative powertrains and fuels and so on. But the opportunity on autonomous driving does not change only the way how energy is used, but it changes completely the way how mobility is executed at last. So I think the big opportunity is the opportunity for the automotive industry to come from classic manufacturers of cars to suppliers of services around mobility.
Nico, true or false? Autonomous driving is the greatest opportunity for the automotive industry in recent decades.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's kind of a link between the opportunity and the threat, because it seems like what's happening is that if it turns out that there's less private ownership of vehicles, if we're really talking about more fleet deployment, which most of the autonomous vehicle companies are really looking at fleet deployment, not individual ownership, then what will happen is that there'll be a whole lot less suppliers. There'll be just a few companies that's supplying cars, as opposed to each one trying to find a car that fits our personality or lifestyle. Wow. And if that happens, there'll be a substantial winnowing in the field of automakers, which on the one hand would be a threat to those that don't make it, but it's a tremendous opportunity for the leaders in this. And this is why I think you're seeing so much investment across the automotive sector in this technology.
Wow.
Thank you very much for that, Nico. I think I really should add something here. I really, when you talked about it, it just came to my mind that one question before was not complete answered by me, because one of the biggest things where we work on at the moment is to work differently. So we are just on the process to coming from classic development of cars to a kind of agile development system with development and operations combined very close, like in the tech companies. So we are just on the way to come to being a software-driven company with agile development systems in a huge new campus where I'm working. So, and this is again then the big opportunity to really come to this new service orientation.
You heard it here first, folks. I mean, we have Nico and Amin talking about the future of autonomous driving, and we've jumped into something that truly is innovative. You see a lot of, you see the latest car commercial and they say it's innovative, when really maybe it's just, a new coat of paint, or maybe the engine's a little bit better. But this truly is an innovation. This is something totally different. And Nico, I think you hit it right on the head. There's going to be a narrowing down of which brand is going to be carrying the torch for autonomous driving. And I mean, working, at BMW and helping us drive this forward. You guys are at the forefront of this. This is really fantastic. Wow. All right. So the last question. True or false? People with disabilities who have a harder time driving, like people with impaired vision, people with amputations, or people with progressive disabilities, for example, like Parkinson's disease. So people with disabilities, will they be able to regain more independence and individual freedom with autonomous driving? Let's start with you, Nico.
So I would say maybe. On the one hand, that is a fantastic opportunity for people to move around who are visually or cognitively impaired. Gives them great options. On the other hand, there's still this interface of the person getting into the car and being able to operate even the interface with saying whether they need to go and such. And so if we look right now at, again, Uber and Lyft as models, these transportation network companies, ride sharing as models, they are having a fairly hard time with some of these things. Definitely people with physical disabilities, it's very difficult to make it work with these services because they need all sorts of assistance, which can't always be guaranteed by the driver, and in fact, can't be taken on sometimes by the driver. If I'm a person I'm wheelchair bound and a car shows up to take me, an autonomous vehicle shows up to take me, I need to be able to get myself into the vehicle easily and then collapse my wheelchair and get it into the vehicle easily. And that's just one type of disability. Now, it's possible that we will have vehicles that are completely designed for these special cases. Maybe you can roll directly into the car. The question so far has been that creating those types of vehicles for specifically those populations is expensive and hasn't penciled out, which is, so that's why there are some services that exist that are Uber-like services, but for instance, paratransit, but they are very limited and they are very expensive, and they still have a person who can help. So what happens with someone with disabilities, has a problem on some of these rides and there's no one around to help? I think that's something we haven't quite figured out how to master yet.
But don't forget that there are so many people around which have disabilities, but they are able to do many things. I have a good example again from my private side. My grandfather, he's really happy to drive his car, but he's now also quite aged. So he is reluctant to drive, for example, to Italy, because the long way on the motorway is too much for him. So he asked me, when will your car be ready for driving on the motorway? Because I want to buy one and then I can go back again to Italy. Today I can't. So this is a big opportunity for many people who are really struggling with their driving capabilities, but still are not disabled people. So I think there's a big opportunity for individual mobility for the future, even if you don't talk about really people with disabilities.
So it's not just a question of, the typical commuter going 26 minutes and then maybe going 30 minutes. It's a question of all these different parameters and different demographics that can benefit from autonomous driving in their own specific way and throughout their entire lifetime, it sounds like.
And I would add that it's and this is a really good point you're making, which is we shouldn't think about autonomous driving and autonomous vehicles as a thing. It's multiple different things. There's tons of different use cases. There's tons of different form factors. In other words, what the vehicle might be like. There's tons of different conditions. So we should think about the plurality of that, and also think about places, situations where it will be easier to have these types of vehicles exist, and that we'll probably be seeing them first. So it's not just AVs are here and all of a sudden we can do all these things, but there might be certain use cases that work better for it as it starts out.
Amazing. So I'm feeling like bringing you guys together for this podcast has been, a very happy accident, so to say, or a wonderful Zufall in German, or a wonderful coincidence that we say. So I'd like to use the rest of this interview, the rest of our time today, to have each other maybe ask each other a question and use this as an opportunity to exchange ideas. Given that you both have very different perspectives on the topic and come from different directions towards autonomous driving, not just as an engineer slash scientist standpoint, but also as a European, Amin, and as an American, Nico. So, Amin, do you have any questions for Nico that might be able to help progress autonomous driving in the future?
Yes, definitely, Nico. I'm really curious to hear what you are thinking about the, let's say, research mentality in Europe. We have so many good researchers here, but when it comes to innovation, we see the big companies being very explicit on that, but we don't see the startup scenery like we have it in USA, I think. So what would you recommend to Europe to change in the surroundings to push this forward?
That is a great question. I actually spent 7 months last year living in the Netherlands while I was on sabbatical. I was on leave from the university for a year and spent 7 months in the Netherlands working on these very topics. And it was very interesting to see the differences between what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the United States. My goal for going over there was really to try to increase the conversation between the two continents. So I was thrilled to be doing that and thrilled to be doing this podcast actually, because I see that as continuing that goal. And yes, they're really different situations. And one of the things that I would talk a lot about with people in the Netherlands is that the U.S. is much more of a free market. Obviously, there's a lot more permission to do many things, which has led to a situation where there's a lot of startups and it's quickly iterating. And I often say it's like the Wild West over here, where things are constantly being tried and new things happening. But it's also led to a whole lot of negative consequences of those things. So we've done things poorly sometimes, and the regulatory sector has not had control of what's happening. And we've had, for instance, this huge increase in VMT and congestion based on some of these services. There's been some safety concerns. So it's a little bit that the U.S. has allowed a lot of things, and has both for good and bad created some problems, but created a lot of opportunities. In Europe, the situation is obviously there's much more, we'll say, control from the public sector side on all these things. And on the one hand, I think that is fantastic, and I'm a little bit in awe of how that can happen. On the other hand, what's happened is that there's a lot less experimentation happening. There's a lot less, and I would say not on the research side, but on the implementation side. A lot less deployment of new technologies in cities, and the benefit of that is that you're not seeing some of the negative consequences of these issues. The problem is that you are not getting a chance to learn on the fly. And the concern would be that if Europe continues to have this approach, that the technologies and the business models, the deployment, the understanding of how all this works will advance much more quickly in the United States and in China, and that eventually it could be that Europe is purchasing a lot of its transportation options from abroad instead of developing them internally. So there needs to be a balance of having regulations and being cautious and careful with how you allow things to expand, so you don't get the negative consequences. But on the other hand, taking enough risk and letting enough of this happen so that you can learn from the business models, have both the public sector and private sector learn about deployment, so you can actually test these things, have knowledge, and then develop, I would say, strong options.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer.
That was amazing. Seeing it from the American side, the U.S. side, and then the European side as well. I mean, what do you have to say?
Yeah, well, I completely agree, and I think that if we come to a culture in Europe as well, where we have this kind of balance between the conventional and their very thorough and safety-oriented approach in Europe, but also allowing for startups and for learning on the fly, this could be really a tremendous success also for the industry in Europe.
Fantastic. And any other questions that you want to ask each other, or topics that you want to discuss, or even pick each other's brains? I mean, how often do we have the chance to be together and discuss this fascinating topic?
So I've got two questions. One of them is, do you foresee in the models that you're doing this being individually owned vehicles, autonomous vehicles, or do you think the future is more towards fleets?
Well, both of them. I'm completely convinced that the individual car and also the individual ownership will for a long time stay a very, very strong, also emotional lead of people. They really want to possess cars, even if many people say this is the old world, but this is a very lively world still, and hopefully it stays for a long time so. But if you then come to city traffic, and everyone understands that parking is completely annoying in big cities, you really will see that young people do not do a driver license anymore, and so many new trends coming up and showing that fleet business in cities will be also a very, very big part of the business in the future. We have talked already about agile development, about service orientation, and so on. The big question behind this is, when is this the case? Is it 2030? Is it 2040? It is definitely not the next 5 years. So from a technological point of view, when it comes really to industrialization of this high complexity with artificial intelligence behind, with the new laser scanners as mentioned and so on, then we see that there's a long process going on before we come to this new perfect world in cities, in parallel with many of our customers having their own cars in the countryside.
And let me ask you another question as well. So a lot of this technology, the companies that we talk to are really looking at this for individual vehicles. We'll say, something similar at most, maybe a van. But we're not seeing that many people working on it for transit. And I was wondering what your thoughts were about putting this technology in transit. Are there different challenges than in the smaller vehicles, and do you see that happening, and when?
Did you really say trains or
transit? Transit is like buses and trams.
Okay.
Buses mostly, and
buses. Yeah. Well, this is really now. If you talk about road transport, then you can talk about all these things a lot. If you talk about trains, the story is completely different. If you want to have autonomous trains, you need to do something like Singapore and so on, where you have completely closed gates for the people. So you need a lot of investment to change a train from a normal driven train to a driverless train. But the relation between the costs of the driver and the transport effort is drastically different. So if we talk about transit on roads, then it comes to buses. And if you talk about buses, then it comes to having also this kind of service which you need if you are being driven in a bus. You need typically the bus driver to be flexible on where you go off and up on and so on. So I think the bus driver is in relation to the big volume of people he can transport, not the biggest cost factor for the bus companies. And he also gives a lot of service and flexibility to the whole system. So he can negotiate between different travelers in his bus, which maybe an autonomous system is not able to do. So when it comes at last to city buses, the story is again completely different. So I believe also that autonomous vehicles in cities with a huge load of people, let's say, is a very efficient solution for the future. Maybe not for BMW, but for cities, it's very interesting to do something like that. When it comes to transit, I don't believe in automation, having said what I just said here. So I believe that on the long distances, the car is unbeatable when it comes to convenience and flexibility. And in cities, it's very clear that we need other solutions there.
Thank you so much. And it's an honor and a privilege to listen to you guys talk. Well, then I think this is a great place for us to wrap this up. I mean, I know for one, I came into this podcast with a good handle on the 5 levels of autonomous driving. But what I've learned since has been a lot. Things like innovation, survival of the fittest, the US and the EU startup scenes, more flexibility, less injury, better commuting, laser scanners, transit opportunities, and most importantly, safety. And it's also been great to listen in on the both of you having this discussion in the field of future autonomous driving and how it's going to impact the general public, not only in the near future, but also in the next generations to come. So thank you so much, Nico and Amin, for spending time with us today.
Thank you. It's been great conversation.
Thank you a lot.
So, Nico, where can the podcast listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
Thank you for asking. So I would point people towards our website, which is urbanismnext.org, O-R-G. And we have a resource there called The Nexus, which really curates a lot of the research happening around these different topics, looking at the impacts on real estate, on land use, on urban design, and on transportation. So I'd point you to that. And the other place that I'd point people is that we hold a conference every year. And for the first time this year, we're going to be holding it in Europe. So June 24th through 26th in Rotterdam is the Urbanism Next Europe Conference, and I'd invite people to come out to that.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, Nico. And Amin, same question. Where can the podcast listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
Well, as I'm an engineer within an engineering department, I'm not the public person here, but if people like to come to Munich and see the BMW Welt, and they also go to Unterschleißheim and see the autonomous driving campus and all the prototypes of us running around there. So we have 150 cars around running on the highways around Unterschleißheim and also in the city, which gives us the perfect test field. They will be, I'm sure, completely convinced that we are doing a great job there.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Nico and Amin, for being guests with us today on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to our podcast listeners for listening to this week's episode of Changing Lanes. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to our podcast for future episodes. And to dive deeper into all things BMW, head on over to bmw.com to learn more. I'm Jonathan, and this has been Changing Lanes. See you next time.